Yeah, it was right in my very first mass.
Right.
I remember I was the only person who sang, and everyone stared at me, and everyone looked miserable. And at the end of mass, I mean, I had barely said "Go, the mass has ended" when the mass ended, and people were gone. I mean, you know, if an alien came down from outer space and observed, you would think that those people had been forced against their will to be at mass, like the body line. It was almost oppressive, and it was, you know, like where's the life? Like where's the zero joy? There was no one was involved. There was very little people serving, and it was like, how do we wake this up? How do we help people encounter the living God?
Welcome to Into the Truth, the podcast from the Catholic Truth Society. I'm Pier Paolo Finaldi, the CEO of the CTS, and I'm very pleased and honoured to be welcoming Fr James Mallon for this podcast. We're at this wonderful conference in Harrogate in Yorkshire, and it's really been wonderful to listen to you share your experience of the divine renovation kind of story. So welcome, Father.
Thank you, Pier Paolo, and welcome to all your viewers.
Well, so just to for those who don't know you, who haven't kind of come across you, there's probably very few people now. You're originally from up north in Scotland.
Hi, laddie. In fact, Yorkshire was where I used to go on holidays when I was a wee boy.
Wow, down south.
We go to Scarborough. Okay. It was like going to a far-off foreign country.
So what age did you go across the pond?
I was 13. In 1982, we went to Nova Scotia.
Tell us a little bit about your story. I mean, when did you kind of fall in love with the Lord? What age did that happen?
I grew up in a kind of family where literally, I think I've missed Sunday Mass twice in my life.
Right.
We always said our prayers before we went to bed, and very staunchly Catholic in a sense. But personal faith was not something we really talked about. I was in my teenage years, and I was going through a bit of teenage rebellion, got into some trouble, was kind of forced to go on this retreat weekend that I didn't really want to go to. And that's when I encountered God in a very profound way. I had a very profound experience of God's unconditional love in a way that I didn't know was possible. And it really changed the trajectory of my life. No thought at all of being a priest. I mean, that wasn't remotely on my radar. And by the time I went into university, I was on a scholarship. I was looking to go into medical school, and had fallen in love with a good Protestant girl who was challenging me over aspects of my Catholic faith. And I was kind of like a typical dumb Catholic. She'd be like, ask me questions about the Eucharist and Mary and the saints, all the typical questions, and I was like, given the typical answer, I don't know, So it was. Someone gave me a book, a catechism. I started reading it, and I remember at the same time I was growing in love with the Lord. My prayer life was growing and developing, and I just started to devour things. In fact, I got my hands on some material from the Catholic Truth Society and found it incredibly nourishing. And by the end of my first year at university, during Mass, I had an experience of a call to priesthood, which scared the living daylights out of me because I did not want to be a priest. But yet it was so strong. And so I tried to run away from it for about 8 months, and I couldn't run. And so I kind of surrendered, broke off with my girlfriend the following September, went out to the seminary and did 3 years pre-theology and a 5-year program in theology, including 1 pastoral year. And I was ordained in 1997. And since then, my journey is continued, and I think, as St. Ignatius of Antioch said in one of his letters, I think I'm becoming a disciple. It's an ongoing journey. So
I remember first coming across your name, I think, listening to some Catholic Answers. They would put out their phone-ins as podcasts, and I'd be listening to them on my motorbike going into work at CTS back that was sort of 2014, 15, or somewhere.
I was probably before that. I was I had discovered Alpha as a tool to evangelize within a parish, because I was looking for something to how to bring this to life. But to do Alpha, I had to overcome two strong biases. One, it was Anglican,
Right.
which was very suspicious. I thought I was very suspicious. Secondly, I'm sorry, but it was quite English, and as a from being from Glasgow. But I sat down and I watched one of the videos, and within 20 minutes, the quality of the content really was beautiful, and it was profound. And so I was really, after running Alpha, was really sold on the particular model of communal evangelization that was very, very effective. I could talk at length about that. But my primary concern at the end of it was what to do afterwards. So I had no problem with Alpha being an introduction to what we as Christians believe in common. Alpha has never theologically claimed to be basic Christianity, because that itself is is a Protestant statement. I mean, it's like we would never say that the content is basic Christianity, because that's a real judgment. But to say it's what we hold in common is a solid ground. But what to do after Alpha? What to do after Alpha? My primary concern as a young priest was to fill in the catechetical content. And so I looked around at the programs and I didn't find anything satisfying, so I created one. Called it Catholicism 201. I did 8 topics. The first one was on the church, to fill out the ecclesiology. I did 4 sessions on sacraments, session on Mary and the saints, and 2 sessions on Christian morality. And we structured it after Alpha with the idea was you do Alpha, then you would do Catholicism 201. We had the meal, talks, small groups, a retreat weekend, and such. And we eventually, a couple of years later, someone said, you should put this on video. I didn't know anything about video, so I watched what people did, and I said, that doesn't look too hard, so forgive me if anyone's editing this, but I didn't know what I didn't know. But we went ahead and we produced this. You get 3 cameras, and we created this 8-week series, and I did, over the course of a couple of years, all the editing and the DVD authoring and the sound mixing, and we packaged this thing, and we went on to sell tens of thousands of copies of this course, and it was translated into Spanish and Russian, Chinese even. It was hilarious. So that's why I was on Catholic Answers, was because of Catholicism 201.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got 2 questions. I mean, one, I want to come back to Alpha, especially in a Catholic context. I think it's important, especially for our audience, to talk about that. But first of all, what was it of your experience in the parishes in which you were serving that led you to think, well, we need something here? What was there a particular kind of experience or a particular problem that you saw?
Yeah, it was right in my very first Mass.
Right.
I remember I was the only person who sang, and everyone stared at me, and everyone looked miserable. And at the end of Mass, I mean, I had barely said, go, the Mass has ended, when the Mass ended and people were gone. I mean, if an alien came down from outer space and observed, you would think that those people had been forced against their will to be at Mass. Like the body language, it was almost oppressive, and it was, like where's the life? Like where's the zero joy? No one was involved. There was very little people serving, and it was like, how do we wake this up? How do we help people encounter the living God?
I mean, and what was your kind of thought, or was your sort of idea of how we got to that point? Why were we there? I mean, was it a particular problem in Canada or kind of?
Oh no, I mean that is a very huge, enormous question that we could talk about for a couple of hours. I certainly propose some kind of answer to it, but I think it's it's a huge thing. I think short answer is that it's the same critique as Jesus gave the religious culture of his own time, that we settle for the externals and don't have the interior reality. Right. Now, externals are important. We're human beings. We're not disembodied beings, so we need externals. If something is an internal reality, it will manifest externally. But we know that it's possible to manifest to have the external, but not the corresponding internal reality. And I think that we satisfy ourselves with the form so often, and that's what we have. We have the the essential elements of Christian life have been ritualized, they've been codified, and we've learned the ritual. Now, that sounds like a very harsh critique, but I think in many cases it's an accurate one. How else do you explain it? I once heard two priests talking in a podcast were commenting on my first book, and they were talking about the chapter on sacraments, and they voiced it like this. How can it be that although sacraments work, they don't work? Like, we believe that sacraments are objectively valid. Like, there's an objective reality. It's not a mere symbol, and so we shape pastoral care around the impact of valid sacraments and what that means. And we, at least since the Reformation, have really counted sacramental validity, which can be a very abstract thing, as being of very, very high value. But the Church also teaches that there's such a thing as sacramental fruitfulness, which is not what we call ex opere operato. It depends on the faith. We don't seem as concerned about that, which tells us that we're okay with the externals. As long as we have the externals, we're okay. And here's the thing, as long as we were in a Christian culture, a Catholic enclave within that culture, as long as faith was a family value and the weight of the communal custom was towards church, and we valued that, you could get away with it. It sufficed. But as soon as you come into our present climate, it doesn't stand a chance. It really doesn't.
I mean, that sounds very much like a kind of a version of the sort of sacramentalized but not evangelized kind of way of kind of seeing where people had got to.
Yes, and it's a nice. That expression is very rhythmic, but I would say that that's not even sacramentalized, right. Because if would it were true that people actually receive sacraments, I think sometimes I think, for instance, in baptism, I think of, again, the history of, say, infant baptism. I want to be clear, I'm not anti-infant baptism. Sure. The custom of infant baptism is very old. It goes back to the early centuries. We know from, I think it's the writings of Justin Martyr or Hippolytus, where he talks about the children at the breast being, if they're too small, being brought down into the water. But these were children of adults who were being baptized. And so the link with the adult faith was essential. And of course, as we ran out of adults, by the 5th, 6th century, we ran out of adults to baptize. We normalized infant baptism. And so the practice shifted first for practical reasons, and then we changed the emphasis of the theology to follow up on that, and the theology's never really recovered. So if you, at the parish level, highlight the connection, the fact that what we say theologically, baptism is a sacrament of initiation into the life of the church, most people look at you as if you're crazy. Like, what are you talking about? Like, I can actually come and request baptism and have zero intention, absolutely zero intention of coming to church, of being connected with church. And I've concluded in many ways that a lot of families who are disconnected from church, they're actually not even asking for baptism. So it's not even that they're being sacramentalized. They're unable to engage the sacraments. And so they're being ritualized perhaps, but not sacramentalized. So I think that's how far gone this whole thing is. Right. And again, it's one of these questions of, Christendom, a culture where faith and culture are very much aligned. A certain pastoral methodology works. That culture is gone, but we're still clinging to the practice. And there's, I think, a whole bunch of reasons for that. But they don't produce fruit at all anymore. And we have this vague idea of that somehow, the sacrament will kick in as if we've handed out magic pills. I mean, that's not even our theology. I mean, the church teaches, the tradition teaches us that fruitfulness is dependent on faith.
So you'd seen this situation in your own parish where even those who were kind of attending had not really kind of opened up to the graces that the sacrament should kind of kickstart in our life.
Absolutely. There's a couple of sources we can look at. Let's immediately look at the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and I think it's in the 1100s paragraph, and it says that evangelization, conversion, and faith must precede liturgy and sacraments. That's what the Church teaches. And that's what the Scripture teaches. Evangelization, conversion, and faith. You see, in the Catholic tradition, we have word and sacrament. But the heart of the tradition is not word and sacrament; it's word then sacrament. It's the word leads to the faith that is moved, that is evoked, that is called forth through the proclamation of the word, is consummated sacramentally. The sacramental consummation. If you've ever gone to like a non-Catholic church service, they're of course very rich and heavy on the word, but it's almost like you're like, okay,
And
but
then,
what do I do with this? Like there's and you can almost see it in the gathering. There's a desire, there's a reaching, a stretching for something concrete, sacramental, that we're going to connect to. So, but when you detach word from sacrament, and I think that you're talking about how do we get ourselves to a place where we satisfied ourselves with the externals. I would contend that it's the cutting, the split between word and sacrament, and losing that word then sacrament. And you still see the remnants of that around. I mean, there's all kinds of maybe Catholics of a certain age who would be, if you actually did an anonymous poll and asked them, I think a surprising number of people would be quite happy to never have to listen to a homily ever again. In fact, you can probably skip the readings; they'd be quite happy as well. Let's just get. In fact, let's skip the. Can you just give me communion? Just give me communion. I think that there's a certain number of people that would probably say, yeah, that would be okay. So that's one of the great insights of the Second Vatican Council, to try to restore the primacy of the word in all of the celebrations of the sacraments, that we have word then sacrament. So I think there's I think the great story of the church in Korea, I think it was when the missionaries were chased away, and about 100 years later they came back and found a Catholic community still thriving, and it's because they had the Word of God. So the two belong together, but it's the faith comes through hearing, and it's the proclaimed word that leads to faith. So that's what the Catechism tells us. The Great Commission, I think, is a central point in Divine Renovation Ministry. What we, because I'm convinced of this, that we do what we do because we believe we're supposed to do it. There's a operational theology that drives our behavior. But if you look at the Great Commission, the central point of there's 4 verbs. There's the task to go make disciples, go make, baptize, and teach, and there's the finite verb is make disciples. It's one word in Greek, mathetusite, make disciples, and we're really good at going as Catholics. We're really good at baptizing and teaching, but we're not very good at making disciples. And if you think about it, baptizing and teaching are basically consequent to the task of making disciples. So our primary thing is make disciples. And then baptism, you can say sacraments and catechesis. But you look at most parishes, our best parishes are doing catechesis and sacraments, without the evangelization part. And I think that's a real problem, that the very heart of the Great Commission is what we left out. And there's a historical reason for that.
So having seen that kind of particular issue in your own parish and the parishioners that you were serving, you sort of were looking for a solution to that, and you said you produced some of your own materials, but you eventually kind of settled on Alpha as a really kind of good way of getting people kind of involved.
Yeah, early on it was about filling the catechesis. I've learned, and that was well using Alpha, because I could talk for an hour about why I believe Alpha is a really effective in a postmodern context. But later on, it was more. I still believe, of course, in filling in the catechesis, but now I have a different approach to it in terms of it's more about involving people in a web of relationships, about leading with an experience of belonging, which will then lead to ongoing learning. Okay. And so I've kind of over the years I've kind of changed the approach, but still using Alpha as the evangelization tool.
So last question. So from a Catholic perspective, from Catholic Truth Society podcast here, I mean, it's often been said that some of the issues with using Catholic with using Alpha in a Catholic context is the kind of slightly different emphases of ecclesiology, Mary, the sacraments. Yeah. So what would you say to people who kind of have that
I would say that the
reservation?
The theological issues with Alpha primarily is what's not said, not by what's said. And I think if you start with that, you're like, okay, but. I mean, what course that, if you go to primary 1, are you getting everything in one go? There's sometimes things are presented in a slightly different way, and then the following year they'll say, oh, by the way, there's actually more to it than what we told you. I really believe if Catholics invented Alpha, it would be 39 weeks long. Like it's
got to say everything from the beginning
exactly.
To the end.
It's called Alpha, and there are more fundamental truths. And the goal of Alpha is not catechesis; it's encounter. It's to bring people into relationship, and we got to be careful of theological dog whistles. I mean, most of us who are concerned about these things are very sensitive to nuance and in particular ways of expressing truths, and it's missed by 99.9% of the people, because we still in many ways lead with rightly. I mean, we believe in the truth. Jesus is the way, the truth, and life. We believe the Catholicism has the fullness of revealed truth. But the people we're trying to reach out there are very suspicious of comprehensive truth claims. They're looking for religious experience.
Yeah.
They're looking for an experience of belonging. In this great age where everyone's connected and friends and online, people are lonely. They're desperately lonely. They're looking for belonging. And we are in an age where people are obsessed with identity. People are looking for identity. What deeper truth is there in our Christian faith and our identity in Christ? And so I think we've got to try to think in the categories of the people we're trying to reach. And I think Alpha does a good job of that. What we must do as Catholics, of course, is have an adequate follow-up.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, it was great.
Thanks for everything you do for the church,
Thank
Father.
you.
And,
great questions.